Hello and welcome to Your Coaching Journey, a podcast for doctors about coaching. Whether you're a coaching doctor, a doctor who is learning to coach, or a doctor who'd like to build coaching into your professional life, then this is the podcast for you. Hello, I'm Tom Dillon, and with me today is my co-host and business partner, Helen Leathers. Good morning, Helen. How are you?
Good morning. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Good. I'm very well, thank you very much. Yeah, looking forward to this morning's podcast. And it's a continuation of the last one. So the last podcast was our 100th episode, and we got very excited about it and had great plans to include lots of material, lots of extracts of previous episodes in that podcast, but got a bit carried away with it all. And
we did.
We decided to cut it a little bit short and bring it to this podcast. So this is episode 101, but it's kind of a continuation of our celebratory 100th episode. So what we're going to do this morning is carry on listening to our coaching doctors and their views on coaching. And in each of our podcast interviews, we have asked coaching doctors, what is their favorite coaching question? So we are going to hear from them. Actually, before we get going, Helen, what's your current favourite coaching question?
I had a feeling you were going to ask me that, and I obviously just had the feeling and therefore didn't prepare for it. One question, and I don't know that it's my favourite question per se, but I've asked it in the last couple of coaching sessions that I've done, and it's quite powerful. And it's quite interesting and it stays with people. And so that is, I'll use the question on you, Tom. I'm wondering, who is Tom Dillon?
Oh gosh, that's another podcast episode, isn't it?
Well,
I'm not going to answer it.
As I said that, I suddenly realised that I remember when I first moved in with you, and we first got one of these devices. I won't say their name because we'll set off everybody's devices who's listening. And we jokingly asked this device.
I jokingly asked,
who is Tom Dillon? Bearing in mind, I just moved in with you. And she told us that
I was expecting her to say Newcastle Rugby Union players, because that's the only other Tom, the only other popular, successful celebrity Tom Dillon.
Instead, she told us that you were, I think, a Welsh serial killer.
That was American, I think.
Was it American?
Yeah, it was
American. It was definitely a serial killer, though. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, so my secret was out.
But so that's just reminded me of that. But
yeah.
I have asked a couple of coaching clients recently who is and their name. And it's been such an interesting conversation that's come from that about their identity and what makes them tick, what makes the parts of them up to a whole. So I'm quite enjoying that. It's a tough question, I think. It can be quite an emotive question, but it has triggered some wonderful conversations. So excellent. I'm going to go with that.
Wonderful stuff. So,
what about you?
Well, I was going to tell you, but then one of our coaching doctors uses the same question and tells us that it's her favourite. So let's listen to what our coaching doctors have to say. And at the end, when we've heard from all of them, you can guess which one is my favourite. I'm sure I must have mentioned it on the podcast before, but let's see.
I think it was right back in an early episode.
Yeah.
If it's the same one.
I can't remember what I said last time, but let's see if I'm being consistent.
Yeah, okay.
It might have changed. I'm allowed to change my mind, but
let's find out.
I do have a favourite. So let's hear from our coaching doctors. So let's hear from Dr. Nikki Paul, Dr. Natasha Holmes, and Dr. Becky Howie.
So my favourite question is actually one of Tom's that comes from Tom's code. It's a great question. It's what do you know now that you didn't know at the start of our session? I think that's great. It asks the client to kind of reflect on what's been covered at that session and Yeah, sometimes they come up with things that weren't necessarily what you were thinking. But I think it's a really empowering question for them to realize that they're the ones in control. They're the ones that are taking something from this. And that's definitely my favorite.
I think my current favorite question is when somebody's struggling to move forward with something, I will either ask them, what the barriers are to achieving that. That's not actually my favorite question. My favorite question is sort of asking that question first and then seeing what they say. And when they're talking about it, I will obviously take note of the content of what they're talking about in terms of barriers. So either feelings or thoughts. And I'll look at their expressions as well. So a bit of kind of Gestalt sort of aspect of coaching and looking at their, what's happening with the tone of voice, with the body language, etc., with their eyes, their face, and then reflecting that back to them. So saying, oh, when you said that, you looked like this, or you sounded like this, and then sort of asking them what that is about. And also, and sort of a second part to that question being, what would you do if you didn't think that? Or what would you do if you didn't feel that? Because I think we often underestimate what's holding us back. So, for example, I used that recently with a coachee where they were thinking about ways that they could make their job work for them so that they could be happier at work. And one of the options was leaving the NHS, but it's something that they felt really guilty about. So I asked them, okay, what would you do if you didn't feel guilty? And that was just sort of opened everything up, because suddenly they could imagine maybe being somebody else and somebody who wasn't held back by that feeling and what they might do. So it allowed them to move past that feeling and think about different options.
I've seen myself with our staff saying things like, well, what would you like to have happen? Because I think people love to come to you with problems and, oh, so-and-so said this and, and it's not fair. They're getting X, Y, and Z and I'm not getting that. And so you say, okay, well, what would you like to have happen? And people are stumped when you give them that question. They've never thought about what they actually want to change. They know something they feel something needs to change, but they don't know what. So I think that's quite a useful exercise as well.
And that last one with Becky, I think that was your favourite question.
It is my
What
favourite
would you
question.
like to have
Well
happen?
done. Well done.
Yes.
I know. For me, it just cuts through all the nonsense, doesn't it? I'm perfectly happy for people to tell their story, and on our training, we encourage our coaching doctors not to interrupt the storytelling that people have, because it's important that people feel heard, and being heard is healing. But there comes a point where we want to move on. We want them to move on. And just, what would you like to have happen is a question that stops the complaining, the focusing on the negative, the feeling trapped in what they are going through, and gets them thinking about the future, gets them thinking about moving on. So I think it's a great question.
Yeah. I've got a great visual there that, is it sinking mud where people wriggle and they sink faster?
Yeah.
And it's almost like when you're stuck in the problem, you're wriggling around in the sinking mud. And then when someone asks you, what would you like to have happen? That's when you stop. And that's when you stop sinking. That's my kind of metaphor. Although, I was a child of the 80s where sinking mud and quicksand were, seemingly major things to be scared of in life. I've never come across it myself, but
I'm a bit older than you, and I grew up with Tarzan being on the TV, and I think almost every episode someone fell into quicksand and was swallowed up slowly, painfully, agonizingly slowly. And
it's not a real thing in everyday life.
It
turns out
it's not. But neither are a lot of the things that we were afraid of.
Exactly. They're all just a story.
Yes.
So who have we got next in our favourite question compilation?
So coming up next, we have Dr. Michelle Gooding, Dr. Sarah Lou Wiley, and Dr. Sharina Fernandez. So let's see what their favourites are.
Favourite question is something that I ask when I've summarised or paraphrased to a client, or when I've shared a tool or a model with them, and it powers up the coaching. So it enables them to go from their system 1 top level automatic thinking down to their deeper system 2 thinking, where they connect with themselves and their inner wisdom and inner knowing. And the question is, what do you make of that? So it's just very short, it's very concise, and then holding the silence while the client assimilates that, and then usually pours forth with some inner wisdom of their own and some new emergent thinking. So I'm always in awe of that moment.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and the one I found most helpful, let's say in the last week, for example, is if you could do anything, or be anything, or have your life look or feel like anything, and money and time and objects and people and external forces literally never came into it, what is it that you would do? What is it that you would do? Because so many of these women come stuck in the trenches. They use the phrase, going through the motions, and they describe themselves as being like, the swan on the surface. Everything looks really peaceful, but underneath, oh my gosh, the hard work keeping this going. And actually, if you could just stop for a moment and think, what is it that you want? What is it that you want? What's the change you want to see? And then let's work back from there. Now that we've got a sense of this, let it, feel it in your body, feel it in your mind, embody it, and then, okay, now let's work towards it. Yeah, that's probably my favorite at the minute, because a lot of women, I think it's this idea of getting them to look up again. We're so in the mire, so just look up, and what do you want? What do you want it to look like? That one is really powerful. Yeah, that's my fave this week.
Excellent. I like that. Your favorite this week?
I think, so I was on holiday recently, and I read The Choice by Edith Eger, and it really hit home, because I think it's the question I use the most as well, which is tell me more. Not a question, is it? But it is. But it tends to be the thing I say the most, or if I reflect back, how does that make you feel? I think are my two most used questions, and the ones that I feel elicit a good, bring things out a little.
Oh, I love those questions as well. I love those questions. And, Sarah Lou there said about if you could do anything and external forces were not an issue, what would you do? And it's very much, she said about looking up from the mire, and that is very much like that question, what would you like to have happen? Yeah. It's stopping you in your tracks, stopping you in your sinking sand, and looking up. This is just wonderful. I love listening to these.
So whilst we acknowledge there's not a lot of quicksand around, there's a lot of mire around for people to get stuck in.
Yes.
So great for them to be looking up and thinking about how they're going to lift themselves out of the mire.
Yeah. Yeah. Those questions are like the branch that's held out above the mire of quicksand and sinking mud.
You go back to Tarzan again.
I know. Who have we got next then?
So coming up next, we have Dr. Liz Donovan, Dr. Amy Jo Farrow, and Dr. Jo Hartley. So let's see what they have to say. Actually, I like the clip of Dr. Liz Donovan, and you'll see why in a moment.
You're going to hate this, Tom, because it's a closed question, and I haven't bothered to rethink
I'm not going to allow it. I'm not going to accept it.
Okay, so the closed question is, have you done the maths? So the question is, what could you afford to drop? How much is it worth to you to make these changes? And those other questions relating to the actual financial buy-in to making a change and where they're sitting with that. So I do say, have you done the maths? But I follow it up with what are you prepared to earn? What can you afford to earn? Because making a change often does involve a loss of income. I think because I'm an older person, the older consultants often come to me, and so they are often thinking about retiring, semi-retiring, making some changes to the way they work, which involves considering early retirement, dropping some sessions. So have you done the maths comes up a lot. Yeah. Sorry, Tom. I'm so sorry.
I think what maths have you done would be a lovely open question for you to ask, Lynn.
Yeah, that's a better question. Yeah, absolutely. You're quite right. Nice.
Oh, what does the maths look like?
Yeah, I know there's so many other ways of putting it. Yes. And I've heard myself say it and think, no. But yeah, it's a latch lifter really to how much thought has been given to what space you've got, what space you've got financially to make some changes, I suppose.
Often I find that doctors will say, I don't know, as an answer to a lot of the questions that are asking them, challenging them perhaps to come up with their own answers. They'd really like me sometimes to give them the answers. Mm. And although during the discovery calls I explained that that's not what we're doing here, they still would like me to give them the answers. So when they say I don't know, my first response is normally, and if you did know. Mm. Because they do know. They do know deep down. I don't need to give healthcare professionals and doctors advice on how to look after themselves. Mm. And they also know their own personal circumstances better than anyone else could. So, yeah. So if you did know.
Yeah. So I've had the same favourite for a while, and actually it's one that came from, so Tom will love this, and I was slightly disappointed that Tom's not here to hear this, but actually, I love his questions. What do you know now that you didn't know at the beginning of the conversation? And Tom's code wasn't part of my coaching practice in those days, but having come to the conference and realised what that is, it's one that I will often use in my sessions, because I think it's particularly when the first couple of sessions people unpack quite a lot. I'm coming as a career coach, and usually why they're coming to me is because there'll be some challenges going on. I think that's quite often why people come to coaching, isn't it? That they've realised that something needs to change, and so there's quite a lot of unpacking early on. And I think that at the end of that conversation, it can be really helpful to get them to reflect on what they've learned just from listening to themselves speak.
Lovely.
What a brilliant combination there. And every day's a school day, isn't it? Liz came there with a closed question. I loved how she was apologising to you. Hopefully went away with an open version. And a second vote for what do you know now that you didn't know at the start of the session. That is an amazing question. I love using that question myself.
Yeah, when Amy Jo was saying about her, and if you did know, it is a question that I use in my coaching, but it's one of those questions that if you use in real life, people would just
hate it.
Oh, stop it. I've just told you I don't know. I think it's one of those. But I think in coaching, I think you can get away with it. I think it's, people are in that phrase. You're shaking your head.
Not for me.
Let's agree to disagree on that one.
I think we have to. I think I've just been asked it by so many people who are just obnoxious, and they're being really arrogant about it. This is in my past. And so when someone says to me, I don't know, I prefer to just stay silent, and that works. Because often I don't know is just a trick that people have learned, that they know someone will give them the answer if they say, I don't know, or it's part of their process of thinking. So that's just me. But if it works for you, if it works for Rosie, was it Rosie?
No, it was Amy Jo.
It's Amy Jo.
Yeah, Amy Jo. No, I'm with Amy Jo. I think it's worth trying. I think because it's the default thinking, isn't it? It's the system one thinking of, well, I don't know. It's just, there's no thought behind it. And as coaching is all about generating new thinking, if by asking, and if you did know, in a very friendly way, and if you did know, then it just slows them down and just gets them to actually think about it rather than having that default setting. So I think it's a good one. But yeah.
Just don't ask me.
Bit Marmite.
Yes.
Bit Marmite, that one. But that, again, back to what we were saying around how people come with different approaches and different questions to ask. And these are just questions, aren't they? It's not how you coach, but everyone is unique and everyone has their favorites. Everyone has their past experiences that lead them not to ask certain questions.
Indeed.
Lovely.
I think we have got Rosie coming up now, haven't we?
We have Rosie coming up, yes. So let's hear from our final two. So we've just got Dr. Rosie Khan and Dr. Sarah Golden coming up. And again, interesting questions from them.
Oh, I mean, it's an oldie, but it's a goodie. It's got to be the classic, the magic wand question.
Wonderful. A question and a tool.
Yeah, exactly. It's that question whereby asking them what they want, because so many people don't know what they want, right? I know it is a tool, but it's so helpful, because when people say, I just want to feel a bit happier or a bit less, stressed, actually, you're giving them permission to dream as big as they want. You're saying there's no financial constraints, there's no time constraints, dream big. And people find it really difficult to do that. And I think it's really hard if you don't have a vision, a real tangible vision of what you want for your life, or what you want for your outcome to be after the end of, say, 12 sessions of working with me, then it's very difficult to take action that leads you towards that vision. You just end up saying yes to everything, and it's scattergun approach. But for me, I found that when I had a vision in mind, I was able to say yes to the things that were going to get me closer to that goal, that desired outcome, and no to the things that perhaps weren't, or were going to take me away from my vision, or perhaps weren't a learning opportunity. So I think it's really powerful to start with the end in mind and go from there.
What I like asking at the moment is, when we're getting towards the end of a session, saying, what is the most important thing that you've heard yourself say today?
I love that question.
I love that too.
Yeah, back to our kind of how we finished Tom's Code with that bit of exploration of a coaching session, and same with what you know now that you didn't know at the beginning of our conversation, asking that, what's the most important thing you've heard yourself saying? It's a great question to ask, just to get people to reflect.
It is. And what's really interesting is that that was an early interview. I think it was one of our first interviews on the podcast. And I've had people say to me since, oh, I listened to the podcast and one of your doctors said this was their favourite question, and I've started using it. Yeah. And I just thought how wonderful that was, that it was inspiring to someone to pick that up.
Yeah. So Helen, what's the most important thing you've heard our doctors say on this session?
The thing I think that stays with me is what Rosie said there with the magic wand question. If you don't know where you're heading, how can you get there? And yeah, sorry, I feel quite emotional listening to all of this.
No, it has. It's been lovely just to do that reminiscing reflection. Yeah. And I said this is a process we continue to do. So we've got some more interviews in the bag that we will launch shortly. But yeah, it's great just to connect with the doctors that have been through our program. And so all of the doctors you've been hearing over the last 2 episodes have done our transformational coaching diploma, and say are going on to be very successful in their coaching world. So we delight in that, but also lovely just to hear from them again and just hear their voices again talking about their coaching.
I wonder if it's worth saying here that many of our coaches are listed on our website, so people can find them and choose to engage them as a coach if they wish to, if they've heard something that they like from them.
Yeah, so many of our coaching doctors are on our coaching directory on our website. So if you are looking for a coach, if you're not a coaching doctor and you just happen to be listening to our podcast, as many people do, and want to reach out to engage one of our coaching doctors, we have a page on our website with a coaching directory. So feel free to do that.
And of course, if someone listens and thinks, I like the sound of this, we run coaching diplomas, just in case. We do. You hadn't realised.
Yeah. So we have our transformational coaching diploma for lifestyle medicine, for anyone that's particularly interested in lifestyle medicine. And then obviously our flagship program, Doctors Transformational Coaching Diploma, which has now been running for, and sort of coincidentally, at the same time that we've just had our 100th podcast, we've just started our 50th cohort of the coaching diploma. So it's been very successful. A lot of our students come to us through recommendation, which is great for us. We love that people are enjoying our program enough to recommend it elsewhere. So long may that continue too. So I think we'll wrap it up there, Helen. So thank you again for sitting with me and listening to our previous interviews and a selection of the questions that people have resonated with and continue to use. So
thank you. Thank
really
you for inviting me.
Thank you very much. So next time on the podcast, we will be exploring a challenge in coaching, which is the grey space between coaching and therapy, because I think a lot of doctors coming to coaching have questions around how that all works. So
yes,
have a listen to us next time. We look forward to seeing them.
Bye for now.
Bye for now.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.